Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening for another edition of WOWSA Live with a very special world record holder and our host, Ned Denison.
Hello, I'm an epic marathon swimmer and chairperson of the International Marathon Swimming Hall of Fame. I am not a world record holder in any pool distance of any description and never will be. Alex, happy joining the session. Please tell us about your exploits in the pool, and don't forget for the third time to mention that world record. I personally would have a shirt with it on if I was you, but go ahead now.
Well, after your self-introductions, I feel like I'm out of my element here. I'm not worthy, but I'm honored to be in such good company. My name is Alex Kostich. I'm a longtime pool swimmer. I had a very satisfying and fulfilling swimming career back in the late 80s and early 90s, where I finished at Stanford University. And then I kind of remained in the swimming world and took up open water swimming before it was really a thing the way it is now. And so for the last, I'm 50 years old, so what is that, 27? For the last 27 years, I've been enjoying competitions in the ocean and open water swims. And yes, I achieved my first Guinness World Record last year swimming around Pitcairn Island in the South Pacific.
And all world record pool swimmers have an Olympic story. Please tell us yours.
Well, my story is not so much a story because it never really goes past chapter one. But in 1988, I was a favorite in the 1500 meter freestyle. I swam in the preliminaries and I qualified first. I didn't feel like I gave it my all, so I felt like I had a lot of gas left in the tank for the finals the next night. But something happened between trials and finals. I had some major anxiety, didn't sleep very well, basically had the crippling psychological effects of being in the spotlight, and never made it to the team. But my experience still, I feel like my experience worked out for the best, because had I gone on to the Olympics and done whatever there, I probably would have moved on with my life, gotten a job, not really thought about swimming again. And instead, there was always that little spark of like, well, I didn't quite achieve what I wanted to achieve back then, so I'm going to keep swimming for whatever reason. And I still don't know what that reason is, but it's probably just because I love the sport.
If you were 13 today and you knew that there was a 10K in the Olympics, would you be thinking about both the 1500 and the 10K?
I'd be eliminating the 1500 from my repertoire because honestly, even back then, the 1500 was the longest event I could swim, and it still felt like a sprint to me. In fact, my strategy was always to just go out hard and hold on. I tried negative splitting my races because my coaches always forced me to work that strategy into my swims, and it never worked. Like for me, I would go out in a 1500, and it wouldn't be unheard of for me to do my best time in the 400 on the way out and the 800 split on the way out to the 1500. And I would always just have a lot of endurance. And I always felt like when the race was over, I had a lot more to keep going. And yes, definitely. Like for me, I think my sweet spot has been 10 kilometers or 20, 25K. That's where I really find my rhythm, get into the groove, and just really enjoy myself. And yeah, if only things were just a little different and open water was more of a thing. 2 Olympics sooner than it actually was. Maybe things would have ended differently.
Were you tempted to go for the professional marathon circuit, or did you even know about it?
Well, I knew about it, but at that time also, I was starting out my career here in Hollywood, Los Angeles, California. And, it was a pretty demanding career that I had, and I just didn't see a way of, something would have had to give. I would have either had to postpone my career or take 10 steps back in that regard, and I had already made some really good inroads, or completely apply myself to the marathon swimming circuit, and that's definitely a couple-year commitment. And I chose career at that point because I had just gotten momentum, and I felt like, giving up at that point would just be starting over, 3 or 5 years later. And time goes on, time marches on,
So almost 3 decades now in the open water. You've got some incredible notches on your belt. Let's see, you've got 3 rough water victories, 6 La Jolla victories. Did you have any kind of plan, or did you just kind of sit down at the beginning of the year and go, I fancy a trip to Hawaii, and we'll see what happens?
Yeah, I really never had much of a plan. I fell into open water swimming. And then even after that, I sort of found out through hearsay about the Waikiki rough water swim. And I went my first time in 1993, and I got second. And that, of course, lit the spark, because I was like, well, that's not good enough. I want to come back and win this thing. So I came back the next year, my second year in 1994, and I won. And then I was hooked. I was like, wow, this is a trip to Hawaii every Labor Day. It's a 3-day weekend. I can make this work in my work schedule. And that kind of became like the Mount Everest for me every year. It was what motivated my training for the 12 months. It's the one event that I would taper for, and tapering is always fun. Like a month before the race, I would start thinking about paring down my yardage. I would even shave for it. I took it really seriously, and it was more like for the nostalgia of it. I really loved going back and taking a race seriously and focusing all my attention on this one swim. And I had a really good streak for 27 years. I'm heartbroken that it's been canceled this year because of COVID, but I'm motivated to train and get back in the water for 2021.
You mentioned just before we got on that your pool just opened up now after the better part of 3 months, and you went down for your first session. I think everybody can relate to that first session where you kind of forget how to swim, the arms are all tired, and maybe you pound out a kilometer or two. So how'd you get on in that first session, Alex?
Okay, well, first of all, I would have been happy swimming in a toilet bowl at this point. Like, I was literally going to my neighbors who have like a 3-yard pool, and I was tethering myself to the side and swimming in place for 30 to 40 minutes a day. So going to the pool was just a privilege in itself. But I didn't realize when I got there that they had changed all the long course lanes to short course. And I'm like a real snob when it comes to training. I won't even bother getting in the pool if it's short course, unless it's a COVID situation. So the first disappointment was that we had short course lanes. The happy coincidence was that it wasn't crowded because it was the first day it was open. So I actually had my own lane, which was nice. And, they said you can swim for an hour, but if somebody comes in, they're waiting to get a lane, you're going to have to get out after an hour. So I just went for it. I jumped in and I swam 9,000 yards, a lot of flip turns for me. My legs are more sore than my shoulders are. I really felt the difference being out of the water, for such an extended period of time, or not out of the water, but like having not trained for an extended period of time. It took me a little longer to do those 9,000 yards, and it used to take me to do 9,000 meters. So that's telling you something. And, but it was great to be back in the water. There were some familiar faces, the diehards were there as well. I don't know how word got out, but carrier pigeons or something. But the people that were there were all people that I recognized as regulars. And it was just, it was really nice to be back and actually have a pace clock to look at.
During your 27 years in the open water and doing La Jolla and the rough water, were there open water swimmers that inspired you or you looked towards as possible role models? Did you follow the sport at all, or you just show up and collect some hardware and disappear?
No, of course I follow the sport, but I'm dating myself a little bit here, but I was doing open water as the sport was kind of coming into its own and growing. So the people that ended up being open water stars, Peter Stoichev and stuff like that, would show up at the Hawaii rough water swim and some of the races that I was doing. But they hadn't proven themselves yet. They were also just like coming onto the circuit and developing a name for themselves. So I was actually inspired by whoever it was whose feet and bubbles I might have been eating. I remember one year I had a really great race with Ryk Neethling, the South African Olympian, who had no business doing open water because he was more of a sprinter from what I remember. But he had some really good strategy and some decent endurance, and we battled it out at the rough water swim one year. Gosh, it had to be like maybe 2001, 2002. And we literally came down to the last like 20 yards, and I'd never won a race when it's been neck and neck like that because I just have no speed. I'm like the endurance guy. I'm like the tortoise that keeps on going, and he was like the hare. But for some reason, like I caught a wave, he didn't. Maybe he was super tired, but I literally just touched him out at the finish. And I'll always remember that race because I've never won a race that way. And it was a name swimmer that I was able to beat. So that was a nice memory that I'll hold with me forever.
He's probably telling a story right now down in South Africa about this former 1,500-meter world record holder that he was going stroke for stroke with.
I don't know about that, but we definitely buried our differences because he's since invited me to come do the famous swim down in South Africa in February.
Mile.
The Midmar Mile. Yeah, I haven't had a chance to do it yet, but through social media we connected and stuff. So.
And in the 27 years before your recent adventures in the South Pacific, did you get out to any other swims besides the couple I mentioned, La Jolla and Rough Water?
There's a race I do every year in the Caribbean in St. Croix, which I really like. That's a 5-mile swim, but it's just a lot of fun, and there's camaraderie, and it's a smaller race. It's much more kind of casual, I guess you'd say. There's like 100 people. I did the Turkish, the Bosphorus swim, where it's the only swim where you actually cross continents and you go from Asia into Europe. And it's a current swim, so you dive in on the Asia side and you basically swim downstream. And I think it's about 6,000 meters, and I covered it in 45 minutes. And I did that 2 years ago. And what was nice about that swim was that it's sort of a, like, it's not a massive start because people are jumping off. You have chips on your ankle and you're jumping off of a barge. So you're kind of going one at a time, but like every 5 seconds. So you don't know whether you win or you're in 300th place. You know, there's 2,000 people that do the swim. So I went for it, and I swam the race, and I finished. And I was the first person to actually finish the race. So I thought I had won, and so did the media. And so for probably 2 hours, I was doing interviews, I was posing for the cameras, I was waving. And then it turns out that these two teens on the national team from Turkey had started like half an hour after me, and they ended up faster. So I did end up podiuming. I was third behind these two kids, but it was a disappointment as well as silver lining to be able to like feel like the winner, and then still be able to share in the victory of being up on the podium. It's a huge deal. It's a great race. It's a lot of fun.
Don't feel so bad. Somehow I have a feeling an organizer was advising two superstars from Turkey that the optimum start time for the currents was 30 minutes after the first person went.
You're not the first person to say that, and there was a rumor, but I'm trying to be a gracious third place finisher. So you said it, not me.
The visitor never gets a break, ever.
Right.
It's in the DNA of the sport.
Hey, I got to pretend.
The other continent swim that's quite famous in our world is Gibraltar, so Spain to Morocco. So tell us about the trip out to the Pacific, particularly how did it come up? What motivated you? You've done a couple now. What was the sort of trigger point for these?
Sure. Well, by the way, you mentioned Gibraltar. I can't wait. That's been on my radar. I would love to do it someday. So that's in my sights at some point. I just feel like that'd be right up my alley with the right conditions, and I can't wait. Anyway, so Pitcairn Island came about because I had in the 4th grade done a research paper on Pitcairn and the mutiny on the Bounty, which is like a part of history, part of global history. And I was always fascinated by the story, and I planned to go there as a tourist, not even like with any intentions of swimming, but I planned the trip and started doing a little more research. And as I was reading about the island and, refreshing my memory of history and stuff, I realized that it was swimmable. It had never occurred to me before, but I had also had shoulder surgery in September, and the trip was coming up the following May. And I thought, well, I wonder if I could swim around the island. I wonder if anybody's done it. I wonder how long it is. And then I thought, well, this is a great motivator for me after my surgery to do the physical therapy and get back in the water and actually look forward to doing something that's not necessarily on the clock or not necessarily like intense sprinting. Like if I went to, do the rough water, that would probably not be a great first foray back into competitive swimming, but I wanted to do something cool or incredible or motivating for me to get through that painful recovery process. So that's where the idea was born. I had to go through tons of paperwork and clearances. Pitcairn Island is like its own minor sovereign nation. So I had to talk to the mayor or the president, or I'm not even sure, you know, what you call her. And then there was like a constable who was on loan from Britain who was there, and she insisted that I have a kayaker who was also the village doctor escort me. And I would have wanted a kayak anyway, but the fact that she insisted that it was him because he was the doctor, there weren't that many people to choose from. I think there's 29 people that live on the island. So the whole thing, like, it was logistically very complicated to get all the pieces to fit together, but I had several months to do it, and I wasn't swimming because of my shoulder at first. So, you know, I was on my laptop a lot, communicating with them. And the next thing I knew, you know, we took a container ship out there. We were 3 days on this boat, bringing them supplies. You know, these people are literally at the remotest corner of the earth, and they rely on the supply ship that comes once every several weeks, you know, brings them dry goods, flour, sugar, things like that, and the occasional random intrepid tourist. So yeah, it was crazy, but it was a lot of fun. It was really interesting, wonderful people. It was a homestay. Of course, they don't have a hotel there, so I stayed with the family on the island. And we're still in touch. They all have Wi-Fi. They have the internet. They're on Facebook all the time. They watch Netflix. They're huge Game of Thrones fans. And yeah.
So for the seriously experienced epic swimmers, we tend to throw ourselves into the study of the terrain, the currents. You look at sea charts. You get people to go out and measure the currents at different times of the tide. You make a detailed plan. And I remember one where everything was on schedule for the first 30 minutes. You could have measured the distance difference by a micrometer, and then wave against tide, and it all went pear-shaped, and the plan was tossed, and it was a struggle. Did you do any study at it, or did you just reckon you get in the water and power your way around?
Well, it's interesting you asked that, because I wanted to get as much information as I could. I'm not reckless by any means. I want to be safe. I want to make sure that my crew is safe. And I like knowing what to expect. But really, because of the remoteness of the island and the fact that nobody had swum around it, there was no reliable information. I mean, they told me anecdotally, well, yeah, the temperature's probably this and that. And yeah, we've seen sharks before. You know, they sometimes circle the fishing nets that we have and blah, blah, blah. But I couldn't really get a clear or a very scientific impression or answer of what I was looking for. So when I got there, what I didn't expect was the fact that we were just on the cusp of the rainy, stormy season. So when we landed, we had difficulty actually accessing the island. We had to do a different disembarkation in stormy seas. And so it really looked uninviting. I mean, the swells were, you know, up to 20 feet. It was hard for us to even just get from the container ship to shore. And I was thinking, well, there's no way I'm going to be able to swim through this, because, you know, I'm going to be putting people in danger, not to mention my own, you know, trepidation about swimming in these giant swells. And, you know, there's not really much of a beach anywhere. It's just rocky outcroppings. So, you know, you get caught in the wrong swell and you're either swept out to sea and you get lost because the swells are hiding you, or you get crashed up against a rock. So the first day was like, I basically thought, I'm not going to get to do the swim, because we were only on the island for 3 days. And the next day, it wasn't really much better. And, you know, I had an emergency meeting with my crew, the doctor / kayaker. And then, you know, there were 3 guys that were going to be on a motorboat, kind of keeping their distance, but still keeping an eye, sort of being a buffer between the open ocean and me, because I was going to try to stay as close to shore as possible. So in case I did get swept out by the strong currents, they at least on the motorboat could be nimble and, you know, throw me. They had like a buoy attached to a rope, but the rope was really frayed and it looked like it would break. So I wasn't going to count on that to save me. So yeah, the second day we met and we're like, I don't think this is going to happen, you know, because I had one last day to go. Finally, on the third day, which was the day before we needed to leave the island, the sun broke out in the morning. I couldn't sleep because I was like anxious to see if, you know, the weather would let up. And literally like at 6:30, there were rays of sunshine. We went down to the ocean. The swells were still pretty big, but because it was sunny out, it was easier. Visibility wise, it was just easier and felt less intimidating to me. So we all just agreed. We said, let's give it a shot. Let's go. And literally within 5 minutes, there was no time to prepare or anything. I just like took off and I went clockwise, and I basically swam in a circle and ended up on the same beach coming in where I had, not beach, but landing where I had taken off. And the whole time I was swimming, and yeah, there were some interesting moments with giant swells and stuff, but I was thinking, how am I going to get out of the water? Because the swells coming in and the sets are really, really big, and they're breaking on these boulders on the beach. Like, there's no real easy place. There was one tiny little like concrete landing that they had made to allow boats to come down into, and I needed to time it and make sure that I was like threading the needle and get right back in there so that I could at least land on the concrete landing, which also had urchins and sharp seashells and stuff, so that wasn't easy either. But it all worked out. You know, the open water gods were looking upon me, because I was able to complete the swim in about 2 hours and 37 minutes. A lot of big swells, no sharks, surprisingly comfortable temperature. I'd say it was probably 72, 73, maybe even a little warmer in parts. And just as I was swimming, it was really, really inspiring and exciting to think about the fact that I was doing something nobody had ever done before, and that I was on an island that had such a place in history, in our world history.
So for the viewers out there, there are hundreds of thousands of swims that have never been done before, and I would encourage each of you, as you travel the world or look for adventures, to consider a first ever swim. So you have to have this dream, and it gets to take over your life. The second thing is you need to get a bit of a plan. Now, in Alex's case, you were very fortunate that the local boat people kind of appeared for you. But often finding the local boat people is one of the hardest things. It took us 10 years to find local boat people to do Devil's Island. It literally took us 10 years. And then it's often common that while the oceans have been thoroughly mapped, what they're not mapped for is they're not mapped for swimmers. So you ask a sailboat guy what the deal is with the currents and the whatever, and he says, yeah, he says, you don't want to be stuck on the left of that headland, you know, during such and such conditions, because you won't get past it. And you ask the guy with the motorboat, and he goes, yeah, he goes, that's the point where you typically have to push the throttle down. Kayakers typically can skirt around this thing. I remember asking some dive organizers one time, I figured they knew everything about the tides, and they said, well, you know, that point of land where you go diving, how do you adjust the time of the dive for the currents? And they go, no, we're out at noon every day. And I said, well, but depending on the currents, aren't people popping up all over the place? He goes, yeah. He goes, one day we had some guy pop up 1.5 miles away. And then in Ireland, we have the advantage of something called a curragh boat, which is kind of a canvas-covered boat, which isn't very speedy. And sometimes they know a little bit about the speeds of the water, because they kind of are slow. The one trick I did find was to have a kayaker go around the island at my swimming speed a month before I planned to do it, so at the exact same tidal time, with a GPS recorder, and he'd stop every now and then and record the water speed.
Wow.
And that was fabulous until the first 30 minutes and wind against tide, and it all went pear-shaped. But that was about the closest we ever did. And then finally, you will get some surprises during the swim. And Alex, I know you're new to the sport. The sharks saw you.
Oh, I'm sure of it. I'm sure of it. And believe me, sharks are the least of my concerns. But that's the first question I get whenever I do some sort of an appearance or a talk or anything. Everybody wants to know about the sharks. So, you know, I try to get that out of the way in the conversation early. So, but I'm really intrigued to hear about your planning and the meticulous nature of what you had to do to complete the swim. You know, I'm looking at my own experience thinking that I probably dodged a bullet, because, you know, my kayaker, he had kayaked around the island before, which is the closest I would have gotten to like somebody doing GPS points. But Steve Lunatonis may remember, I actually just went on Google Earth and mapped out the potential course I could take around the island. It was literally just like a crayon circle around the island without really taking into account currents or anything like that. But that was also part of the fun of it, I have to say.
And you were fortunate you had Google Earth. In the old days when we had sea charts,
this is
one
true.
of the islands that I was looking at, it was on 4 different charts. Only one of them was a sea chart and the other were land charts. So trying to get if you can find the distance was difficult. So you mentioned Gibraltar, and by the way, a hint, Gibraltar can take a couple of years to get into, so you want to start applying now.
I'm aware of that, yeah.
The second hint on Gibraltar is you typically start about 1 mile from the windsurfing capital of Europe, and they don't swim when the wind blows. And then the final thing is
you have to dodge container ships, right?
Well, that's the easy part. The other part is you need to go to Spain on vacation, or holiday for the international team. You need to go to Spain on vacation. And if a swim breaks out, fantastic. Otherwise, have a great holiday vacation in Spain. And if you do all of those things, you might be lucky with the weather. It's a beautiful swim.
Yeah.
What else is on your want to do list?
Well, I will say I had planned and scheduled a swim around White Island, which is the active volcano off the coast of New Zealand, which sadly erupted just a month after I had gone there on a reconnaissance mission. I literally flew there and went on the island and did a tour so I could see what it would be like to swim around. And Stephen knows about this because I had everything planned. My plane tickets were bought, my crew was established, and I wanted to do a circumnavigation around a live volcano. Obviously, as a result of what happened, those plans are no longer happening, but it would have been about a 5K swim, so not really much difficulty in terms of distance, but also a big fishing area, lots of sharks, rough currents, and just the fact that it's a live, volcano made it seem interesting to me. But sadly, with the lives lost during the eruption late last year, I think 22 or 23 people lost their lives. Naturally, those plans have been, shuttled probably permanently. But I'm always looking.
It definitely would have been a cool swim.
Yeah. Well, if you know of any other live volcanoes that are safe to swim around, let me know. This one was considered safe.
There is a swim because you work in the holiday area. You might know of the place. There's an island off the coast of Ireland called Skellig Michael. They did some of the Star Wars film. It looks like a giant pyramid coming out of the ocean. It's only about 3K around. The biggest dangers include really overweight tourists falling off the mountain and landing on you.
Okay.
And the other thing is that incredible wildlife. You feel like David Attenborough or Jacques Cousteau out there with stuff that's happening. But the other one, which is fascinating for me, was you get this tremendous upwelling of nutrient-rich water. So if you're swimming around looking at a rock, and all of a sudden you are 4 meters higher, the water has gone cloudy with bits of fish food, and the temperature's dropped 8 degrees. And then 30 seconds later, the temperature's back to normal and the water's crystal clear.
I'm going to have to sidebar with you, definitely, because I want some ideas and stuff. That sounds great. I do know also that the tour operator who helped me plan the Pitcairn trip, who's based in England, goes on these crazy travel adventures. Like their whole shtick is, we'll take you to places that people don't go, whether it's Pitcairn Island, North Korea, countries in Africa that you've never heard of. And they specialize in these kind of tours. And so they always send me these links like, oh, we heard there's this river. Oh, we heard there's this island. Come swim here. It's crocodile infested. So now they think I'm this big daredevil. And so they're always sending me, places to entice me to consider coming on a tour so that I can do the swim. The last one they sent me was Banana Island, somewhere, I think, off the coast of West Africa, which I hadn't ever heard of. And it's on my list to Google and check out what it is. Banana Island sounds enticing.
Well, in 6 days' time, we're going to be interviewing the people from the Bangla Channel, which is between St. Martin's Island and Bangladesh proper.
Wow.
It's been done a few times, but definitely one of those bizarre and unusual places. One of the people on the swim took part in I got to get the number right. And I think it was an 81-kilometer swim down the Ganges.
Oh, wow.
It's the upwater of the Ganges, not necessarily where all the sort of urban activity is. And he famously was disqualified at the end because he went on the wrong side of the finish boat
Oh, no.
after 10 something hours.
Uh,
But
seriously?
I'd love to do the swim only to have the T-shirt that says 81-kilometer Ganges swim. I think you could show up at the rough water and, people would go, whoa, that's a cool shirt.
No kidding. No kidding. I was in India in Varanasi, and I went to my waist in the Ganges. And I mean, there were like dead animals floating by and stuff. It was probably not a good decision. But when I came back, let's just say that I brought something back with me, and I had to go to the urologist and get some medication. That's all I'll say.
Thank you. One of our recent speakers, Martin Strill, didn't share any of those stories from his swim in the Amazon. I didn't want to ask. So you're now moved into the open water. I hear just under 3 hours. Any ambitions for anything longer? You are the distance guy.
Yeah, sure. No, for sure. I'd be open to it. I'm a little bit of a baby when it comes to cold water. So if I'm going to do something like swim around Bora Bora, which I did a couple of years ago, that was nice. 78, 80 degree water. For me, that's like ideal temperature, maybe even a little warm, but I'd rather be warm than cold. But yeah, I'm open to it. Again, with my career, it's kind of hard to like really apply myself and train for something. And even if I were to do something like the English Channel or the Catalina Channel, I think I'm capable, but it would just require more of a commitment and, the acclimation required of going to the ocean and swimming in the ocean for a couple hours, several times a week. It's not as convenient or easy for me with the schedule that I'm keeping now to do that, but never say never. I'm certainly open to it.
Well, one of the warmest big island swims around is Manhattan.
Yes.
And the waters are much, much, much cleaner than your experience of the Ganges.
Well, I should hope so, but I've still heard some nightmare stories about needles floating by and things from swimmers who have done that swim. But I'd be open to that as well.
But the best story from the ancient days was the bloated carcass of a giraffe floating in the river. And none of the circus companies admitted to losing a giraffe. So it was like, oh, what giraffe? No giraffe. But I can tell you the day I did Manhattan, it was incredibly clear, clean. The water quality was fabulous. There was a slight taste of corruption as I went by the UN, but otherwise the rivers were fabulous.
I can imagine. I thought that this was going to be a politics-free conversation. I'm trying to keep it clean for all of our viewers. But no, I love this community. The open water community is just fantastic, and I'm on with Stephen Munatonis. We check in a lot, and but as I said, you and I are going to have to sidebar. But I'm really curious and inspired by this community and the things that I read on the site, and it definitely is what motivates me to figure out what the next thing is. So. Thank you for being one of those people that inspire me as well.
Alex, thank you very much for your time tonight, or this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And we definitely will have those sidebar conversations. And I'm a little bit upset that I never had the idea of swimming around a live volcano, but I live in Ireland. We don't have a lot of that right now, although maybe up in Iceland or something.
Let's find one and do it together. We'll do like the first Otillo swim, like the first tandem swim. How about that? We'll tie.
I could start on the Saturday. You could start on the Sunday, and we might finish together.
All right, works for me.
Take care, Alex. Thank you very much.
We can make it up as we go along. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
Great talking to you.